And maybe don't take tax advice and spend almost $1 million on the advice of someone who's selling you an RV and making a giant commission on the sale. Don't take tax advice from a car salesman. I had a client, a really short-term client, when I was a partner in a small accounting firm, and he came with like 2 years of past due tax returns to prepare. And like a lot of disaster stories, this one doesn't start where I came in, but it really started about 2 years before. So our short-term client owned a printing business, and he had a passion for recreational vehicles and NASCAR racing. About 2 years before we met, this intrepid racing fan went to buy a motorhome so he could take 9 or 10 months going to every NASCAR race that year and take almost a year-long vacation with his wife and kids. As the owner of a high-income, successful business, he had the means to pursue this pastime and a foreman to run his plant when he was gone. So 24 months later, he comes to our firm to file the last couple years of tax returns because he got a little behind. So I'm in a meeting with the guy, and we're going over his QuickBooks for the business, and we look over his last year's tax returns that were actually filed. Just normal CPA stuff when you're meeting with the new client and doing due diligence. So this guy whips out a thick folder of papers and slides them across the table to me, and he's got this big smile on his face. Tells me the story how he bought this big RV and spent a year caravanning around the whole country to every race. And I asked him, hey, how's all this related to your business taxes that we're doing? And he glares at me like I insulted his wife's virtue. He tells me that the car salesman at the RV dealership assured him that it was normal and ordinary practice for owners of RVs to write them off as a business tax deduction. Not only that, but the fuel and the mileage and the insurance and the maintenance and all the expenses related to or incurred on any business trip. He told me that's what the car dealer told him. Food, entertainment, literally the whole cost of everything was a legit tax deduction if you're discussing business. Now, sadly, this was almost 20 years ago, and I didn't have the emotional maturity that I do now, so I just laughed out loud right in his face. I couldn't help it. After I calmed down, I said, "Are you serious?" And I can see this guy's getting angry and more agitated. Then he goes, "Yeah, I'm serious, and I have a letter." And he reaches into his bag and pulls out this hand-scrawled note, ostensibly from the RV salesman, that said, "Hey, the purpose of the RV is for business use." That's all it said. And business use was printed in all caps, and I said, "Okay, I'll look through it." So I did. I looked over receipt after receipt, ticket stub after ticket stub, and so this soon-to-be former client had bought a $310,000 sports coach motorhome with all the accoutrements and the fancy stuff that you'd find at like a Trump hotel. And then he outfitted his entire family with custom leather racing gear that looked exactly like Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s racing attire, but it had their family name on the back and their business name on the back. And then he gives me receipts for fuel bills, restaurant bills, bar tabs, grocery bills, golf club receipts, greens fees, clothing, speedboat rental bills, fishing boat charter invoices, car rental bills, parking, utilities, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then there's the charter airplane back and forth to check on his business a couple times while they were on the road. And he had a nice spreadsheet with it all itemized. So basically this guy paid for a year-long vacation with his entire family without any compunction whatsoever because a car dealer supposedly told him he could write this all off on his taxes. So this dude blasted through the better part of $1 million. And I asked him again, what was the business purpose of all this? And he plainly didn't understand. All because a car dealer told him he could write it off. And I asked him again what the business purpose of this was. All he could rough up was like, it's a business write-off. And then I told him, I don't see how. I don't see any way. And just eyeballing his numbers, I told him, hey, it looks like you're going to owe the IRS about $500,000 in taxes for the last 2 years. Not counting any of your RV stuff and not counting the late fees or penalties or interest. After that, he said something about business marketing. It was a networking trip, and then he just kind of mumbled. Then he broke into the story about how his business had experienced a profit downfall, largely because of his absence, and then the employee that he left in charge hadn't done a good job of running the company. And now he didn't have the money to pay that kind of tax bill after his big vacation, and so I just had to write off the trip as expenses, right? And I just shook my head and said no. And then he was about broke now. I'm like, well, he got more and more angry. The guy raised his voice and explained how he talked business the whole time, and it really was a write-off. And I just shook my head again, no. And then he remembered, oh yeah, that for several of the trips, another employee was along too. So they really did talk business the whole time. So now it really had to be a business trip, right? And I'm like, no. And the conversation came back around to the RV salesman who wrote him the note. And he offered to pay me double my fee if I would write off the RV and the vacation. And I assured him that I cannot. So if I were to try it, I'd lose my CPA license and maybe go to jail. So no matter what he paid me, I really wouldn't change my judgment. And he demanded to meet with the president of the firm, who was also the majority partner, and my boss. So my boss, who's normally a hothead himself, heard this part of the meltdown through the wall, as did about half the other people in our building. So the boss listened to what this guy had to say for about 5 minutes and said, well, have the RV salesman prepare your tax returns. He seems to have all the answers you like. Where'd he get his accounting degree? And with that, the guy picked up all his papers and stormed out. I tell this story not just because it's funny, but to encourage business owners to get a licensed tax professional in your corner that you can trust. So the other thing, though, is we're signing your tax return under penalty of perjury, that we did everything correctly. We're not going to jail to abet tax evasion, even if you pay a double fee. And I always advise clients, hey, give us a call before you make any big financial decisions, just to make sure we can walk you through the options. If this guy would have called an accountant before he bought that RV, we could have saved him a ton of money and stress. So another thing, and maybe don't take tax advice and spend almost $1 million on the advice of someone who's selling you an RV and making a giant commission on the sale. Just saying. Now, there's several ways where you can legitimately deduct items that are at the intersection of your business and your personal life, but it's important to establish a reason for the business purpose for all that expense. It's got to be reasonable and it's got to be business based. And another story, I had a client that left because I wouldn't write off his wife's Mercedes as an expense for his construction company. Now, this is when he told me that neither she nor the car were involved in the business at all. He thought just because he owned the business, just about anything he bought should be a business expense, and it just ain't so. So I recommend call your accountant before you spend money on something that's not a clear-cut business expense. And even if they bill you for an hour or two of research or consultation, taking it to an accountant first will almost always save you money or at least give you peace of mind. So if you found this useful or at least entertaining, share it with a friend.